Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Sivalingam, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of L&D Disrupt Live. Joining me and How CEO and author of Learning at Speed, Nelson Sivalingam. This time we've got Matt Bradburn, founder of the People Collective. Matt, welcome to the show. Maybe before we dig into this topic of why L&D is solving the wrong problems, how we can solve the right ones, you can tell us about who you are and what the People Collective do.
Sure. Thanks, Gary. Well, firstly, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on. So my name is Matt. I'm the founder of a company called the People Collective. We are for all intents and purposes, a boutique consultancy. We work with startups, scale-ups, small businesses of all sorts and sizes to help them put in the right foundations to be able to scale its businesses. We fundamentally think that if you create a great environment for people to learn, develop and grow, then your business will be commercially better off for it. So yeah, we've had the opportunity to work with 100 plus growing companies over the last 4 years and built a small team across the globe, and it's been a very fun journey.
Cool. That leads us perfectly to how L&D can solve these problems, because for all of those things to happen, you have to be solving the right problems. So I guess a good starting point would be, often if we're solving the wrong problems, we'll have the wrong outcomes, right? So what are some of the things that typically happen when L&D is solving the wrong problems? What are the telltale signs that it's doing it, Matt?
Yeah, it's such an easy one to be like, this is all the L&D team's fault. But actually, I mean, like, what we see, and I want to be very, very clear, I don't think it's all the L&D team's fault. Like, when we're thinking about the problems, so many of them come down to the company, the way it's set up, the way it's organized, the priorities, the goal setting, mismatched expectations, no clarity on like what's expected from people versus like what does kind of great performance look like, how does development work in the organization, who's responsible for that development. I think there isn't kind of one root cause for all of this, but I think it's often the case that we'll see like L&D programs being focused on like, right, we've got an L&D program, let's work out the problem we're solving for, as opposed to, right, fundamentally we've got a real challenge in setting clear expectations and goals within the business. Let's work out a way to develop our leaders and individuals at improving the way they go about setting goals within the business, right? So it's fundamentally, it's like, kind of get the egg before the chicken, and instead let's work out whether we want a chicken or a duck first.
Yeah, that makes sense. No,
terrible analogy there.
No, I liked it.
I think just building on what Matt said, what you essentially end up with is a negative feedback loop, right? Where essentially the business or the leadership team come up with what is essentially the wrong problem or not a well-defined problem. And that essentially has a knock-on effect further down, where you're now asked to come up with a training program or course to solve the wrong problems. And then essentially when you put this program out there, it doesn't have the desired impact. And what that does is it creates a negative feedback loop, because now it's going to be harder for you to get budget, because essentially you've gone and spent all of this money. The business goes, well, we've not seen the impact we wanted to see. And that's because you've now got the wrong learning for the wrong problem, and it's not having that desired impact. So it has a negative feedback loop on the budget and what you can do moving forward. And it also has a negative feedback loop from a user perspective or from an employee's perspective, because essentially they invested time and effort into trying to engage with this training program, which actually didn't have the desired impact. And therefore, the next time you put something out, I'm less likely to engage with what you're offering me from an L&D perspective. So the wrong problem seems like a simple thing, like Matt said, but actually the knock-on effect is so significant, and it really does essentially kill the momentum moving forward if you don't nip this in the bud as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. Would love to add to that, right? It's like you throw out like a piece of training and you're like, cool, now you have to do, I don't know, let's say security training. I'm going to pick the really dull one that everyone loves. No one loves security training, right? So that gets thrown out there. Maybe you got like some click-through tasks or whatever. And people are like, why am I doing this in the first place? Like, I get security is important, but like, what's the point in this whole thing? And actually like mapping it back as a company, as a founder, and being like, right, this is the program we're doing. This is why we're doing the program. This is the learning outcomes that we want to reach. This is why it's important. Obviously, it's kind of setting learning outcomes for security. You just be like, right, we've got some challenges with security. At the moment, we want to improve the way this is done. We want to make sure that, everybody can take their own accountability for this, as opposed to this just being, a thing where you see rules being put in an arbitrary way. We want to make sure that you're clear on those rules and why they're important, right?
Yeah, and solving the problem is what gets both the business and the employee interested in the first place, right?
Exactly.
And essentially it's the North Star. They're not interested in completing learning or getting involved in your training program. They're engaged in, their interest is based on, I want this thing that's going to help me solve this problem. And that's both true for the business as well as the employee. So when you get that problem wrong, it becomes harder to engage employees because they're like, well, this is not the problem I have, right? And this is not the problem my team had. So why am I going to engage with this in the first place? So again, it's notoriously, there's a lot of data, and we've spoken about it on the show before, where, in 2020, there was more money than the GDP of 60 countries spent on L&D and wider training. Yet when you look at the statistics about how people feel about it, only 12% of people would recommend what their L&D team are offering, which goes to show this huge disconnect. We're essentially spending a lot of money on things that are not solving the right problems. And so essentially people are not engaging because it's not solving the problem they have.
And this is, this is where security dropped in, like, just briefly. I worked at a company I won't mention before, but like leadership team with the guinea pigs for the security training. No clarity was given by the person who set it up as to why it was important. CFO comes in, she's had a long, tough day. She's frazzled. We sit down, we start doing it as a group. Within literally 7 minutes, she's swearing at the screen, slams her laptop closed, goes, oh, walks out the room, walks out the building, and is like, right, game over. And she was like, if messaging the leadership room office, if anyone puts this rubbish like this in front of me again, I swear I'm quitting. Right? So yeah, you can literally lose your CFO over this.
That's it. Bad training could be the end of a relationship, couldn't it? Nelson, something Matt said there really is about communication, right? So it might not even be a case that you're solving the wrong problem, you're just framing it the wrong way, or you're communicating it to other people the right way so they can't see, like Matt said, what's in it for me? Why should I do this? So, how can L&D teams and businesses in general get better at syncing up on that, framing the problem the right way, communicating it to people in the right way?
Yeah, right. I mean, this is not just for L&D, right? This applies to pretty much every employee and team in the business. But a well-defined problem statement gives you the clarity of focus and gives you the kind of why and what we're doing, and gives you the clarity around that. And also, it's a great way for all of your stakeholders to engage. A well-defined problem is an effective way of engaging the employees who are going to invest their time in learning. It's a great way of engaging your stakeholder community and getting the budget that you need to be able to run these L&D initiatives. And so really putting thought into how you define this problem and taking the time there. And often I find a lot of L&D teams we work with don't spend enough time in that defining stage of the problem. There's too much of a urgency to get an output out there, because the concern is no manager is really going to appreciate the time I put into defining the problem wrong. They want to see output. So the quicker I get to output, the quicker I can kind of demonstrate my value. And so in terms of defining the problem, one of the ways I find is really effective, and this is where L&D can borrow or steal from product management, is historically we've spoken about the idea of kind of user stories, but actually a company called Intercom, they came up with a really good framework called job stories, which essentially combines the idea of jobs to be done and user stories where essentially it's a very simple statement, which is when I am, I want to, so I can. Now there are 3 blanks in that. So the when blank sets the context. What is the context of that need? Is it when they're speaking to customers? Is it when they're a new manager and they're having their first one-to-one conversation? And then you go to, I want to. I want to essentially identify what's the motivation in this moment of need, right? Are they trying to close a deal? Are they trying to support a career conversation? What is that motivation that they're driving? So I can is the last part. And that's the expected outcome. Well, if I do this right, what do I get at the end of it? Do I get to the next milestone in the sales process? Do we generate more leads? Do I have a more engaged direct report? And when you use that setup, you now understand where is the blocker in this job story. And that's why it gives you the why you're solving this. And so I think it's a great framework for defining a problem.
Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts on that? Framing and communication.
Just going to say love and the passion there, Nelson. It's nice to see it's always nice to talk to people that actually care, right? I think in terms of like framing the problem, I really, I could definitely see the value in that approach, particularly within a large organization like an Intercom, where you've got the time and the space to be able to sometimes set aside to get that done right. I think the challenge we see, particularly because we're often looking at like rapidly scaling or at least relatively fast growing organizations, is that for them it's like, we often term it like growing with people debt or organizational debt. Like so much of it comes down to communication. So they're like, yeah, we'll take on people or organizational debt in the form of like a lack of comms, a lack of like ways of doing things, defined processes, stuff that will just work, because they're like, we just need to get stuff done. We need to build product, we need to ship product, sell product, whatever it might be, right? But over time, like you got to untangle that spaghetti ball. And if you're a fast growing company, like taking the time to sit back and be like, okay, what is working, what's not working? Like, right, people are asking us around, they want better feedback in terms of like their performance and their development. But actually you then start to dig into it. You're like, what's prompted that? Why are they asking that question? What's the context behind that question? And you find out that actually what people want is more guidance from their managers in terms of development paths, or like, what should I be focusing on next? Like, give me some, I want some support. I'm craving this support, right? So it's like a lot of, when you, particularly in the smaller companies, but even in the larger ones, it's like, what are the symptoms that you're seeing? And what is the actual root cause behind it? So when you're trying to build like and work out what the problem is that you're trying to solve for, and therefore how you can improve learning in the business, it's like, look at what your people are saying, speak to people across the business. Founders should be doing this, leaders should be doing this, L&D teams, people teams, anyone who's involved in like kind of cross-company pieces like that should be speaking to people at all levels to be like, what are the blockers? What's causing us problems at the moment? What information would you need to get your job done more effectively? What would be useful for you to understand? How can we develop that in terms of kind of longer term learning programs and build that together? So I think for me, it's like, you've got to take the time and dig into it. It's not even a lot of time, right? It's just like talking to your team, actually understanding and then mapping out, is it a symptom? Is it a root cause? Once you've worked out the root cause, get to the point of like, okay, build problem statement, and then start to plan development needs around that. And that can be individual, team, department, company.
Just I think it's such a great point that's often overlooked that Matt's made around kind of speaking to people across your organization. It sounds like a very simple thing to do, but it's incredible how often it's not done. It's almost the equivalent of someone building a product without never having spoken to a potential customer, right? You spend 12 months building this product without ever asking, what do you need? What's the actual problem? Then 12 months later, you put this product out and, surprise, surprise, you find out no one actually wanted your product. And in a way, we've spoken about it before, but the idea of L&D almost being like a failing startup that's putting out this product without actually speaking to its potential customers. And it really isn't that hard. And it's a great opportunity for L&D and the people team in general to really be such well-networked individuals across the business, right? You're essentially being given a really legitimate reason to engage across the business and really understand what are the challenges and problems that individuals and teams are facing and really support them.
Yeah, I see this a lot. Like Jesse Swan, who's COO at Whereby, who does so much in the space, like around people operations as a product. Her kind of thought, she writes a lot on this as well. Like I completely agree with that kind of hypothesis, right? Which is like, if you think about your company as the product, like, are you actually getting feedback from your users, aka your employees? Like, what is it like? And I'm not talking, yes, I used to work at Peakon. No, I'm not talking about engagement surveys. I'm talking about like actually sitting down and talking to them, like actually hearing what they have to say, and then fundamentally actioning those changes, right? Like that's the biggest thing. So when you're building learning programs, people have got to see that action come to life. And I saw Benjamin put in the comments, right? It's like you want to change behaviors to achieve better business outcomes. It's not about like how many people completed this course on the platform. It's like, okay, I completed the course. This was able to help. You should be then sitting down with folks months later, weeks later, be like, was that material useful? If not, how could that be improved? Like it should be, you talked about feedback loops at the beginning, like how can we create a positive feedback loop? But also, we should be developing the service and the product that we're building and offering the organization. And therefore, it should be a constantly iterative process.
Yeah, I suppose part of that's like one half of it, isn't it? Like the qualitative feedback that you can collect from people, but also really nailing which problems to solve comes back to how you collect and analyze data, right? So, what are your thoughts on that? What are the common mistakes people make when they come to that, collecting that quantitative data, and how can we kind of use it a bit more strategically, like you said, to find impact that we want to have?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, right? I'll use engagement pieces because that's like an easy piece around kind of like more quantitative data collection combined with qual. Like when you're going through that, right? You're not being like, oh gosh, someone said they wanted a gold toilet seat. Now we should put gold toilet seats everywhere because it's a ridiculous idea, right? You've got to combine a kind of weight of data around this, look across teams, across the organization, be like, okay, are we seeing that? Let's just say, in response to a question around, I feel like my manager supports my development, that we're seeing, consistent challenges across all teams, i.e., everyone is feeling this, or are we seeing this in individual areas? And then you got to split it out by level, right? Like, is this managers in the middle level, in the kind of core, the heart of your business? And we see this so much, who often go unsupported, right? Or is this like leadership at the top, and are they failing? So I think when you're collecting that data, it's got to be about like, is there a weight of data? Once you've got a hypothesis, test it by actually asking people, find some folks within the business who'll give you an honest answer and get those answers as quickly as possible if you think there's a problem, and then use that to build a plan off the back of it, right? If you're seeing like, actually our core managers aren't able to support their teams, it's not like, oh, we've got a bunch of bad managers. They probably just got promoted into that position because they wanted a promotion. Fair play. You've been there 2 years, you haven't got a pay rise, and you said you wanted to be a manager and that's the only way to grow. Bad way of doing it, but happens. And therefore they've had no support. They're just like, yeah, cool, you learn on the job, you'll be fine, it's no problem at all. But actually your teams hate that, right? They're like, yeah, the person who's now a manager is like, well, I don't like being a manager, I actually like doing the thing. The people who report to them are like, I'm not learning anything, I've got no support. So then you can be like, okay, cool, we need to focus on the core managers, we need to focus on it, the career conversations they're having with people, the feedback conversations they're having with people, what they're doing to kind of do this on a more continuous basis, and then we can build the program from there, right? But that's like end to end, like look at the data, support it qualitatively as well, make sure that you do some spot checks around the business. Once you've got that, you build the clear plan and you build the training, and off you go. Boom, easy, right? A joke. Badly.
Yeah, I agree with that, Matt. And I think essentially you achieve what you measure, right? And if you set out to solve the wrong problem, you're often measuring the wrong metric because you're solving the wrong problem. Or you're solving the wrong problem and measuring the metric you do want to move, but they're both disconnected, the problem and the metric. So you don't see the movement that you want to see because you're putting your effort into solving the wrong problem. And so this is where I think often it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle where, because of that negative feedback loop, you start to claw or scrape the barrel for very basic metrics that show some kind of what we would define quote unquote progress. And that's when you get L&D teams reverting back to essentially very basic activity metrics, like Matt mentioned earlier, kind of completion rates and time spent learning. And the reason why we revert back to that is because we've not really from the get-go set ourselves up to measure the outcome metrics, because we've not clearly identified and defined that problem and then found the metrics that are connected to that particular problem. And then once you've done that, so that's why that kind of measuring piece is not an afterthought, right? It's not once I've pushed this training program out there, now let me go figure out whether it's worth our time or not. But it's from the get-go knowing, what was the baseline, right? If, for example, the problem we're trying to solve is to reduce our sales cycle, okay, great. So the sales cycle right now is 12 weeks. That's our baseline. Now we want to look at, can we get to 8 weeks? Now, is L&D single-handedly going to reduce the sales cycle from 12 weeks to 8 weeks? No, but that's not the expectation either. The expectation is to know whether L&D has had some positive influence on moving the needle on that number. And going back to the qualitative and quantitative piece, like Matt mentioned, it's a combination of both. It's not looking at the hard numbers in isolation, and it's also not looking at the kind of feedback surveys that you get from employees in isolation either. It's looking at them both in tandem to see whether you can build a story or a narrative that puts forward that actually this learning resource, both from a quant and qualitative perspective, we can build the story that says it has helped move the metric that demonstrates that we are solving this problem.
Yeah, Nelson, I think what you just said there kind of alludes to a question we got in the chat from Benjamin. And Benjamin, if you wanted to come on and ask it, feel free, or if not, I can ask it for you. It looks like, yeah, I don't mind just paraphrasing it a little bit, but you alluded to it there, Nelson. It's about how do you get other people on board to share their data, to be kind of more forthcoming about the problems they're solving from a data perspective rather than coming to you with assumptions. Do you have any thoughts on like how, I guess it is that communication piece that you just mentioned, but maybe any further thoughts on that, how we can get people to be more forthcoming with the data and help us define problems better?
Well, I think getting them involved early, going back to what we were speaking about earlier around, getting out there, speaking to people, asking them questions about their problem. It means they're involved from the get-go, from the kind of problem discovery part itself, and you're building that relationship. And again, the classic kind of the status quo right now in many organizations is manager comes and asks for a course. They're like, they've already think they've identified the problem. They kind of self-prescribe, almost like self-prescribing medication to yourself and diagnosing yourself. They do that, ask for a particular course. L&D essentially acts as a procurement function that goes and finds a training program or course. In that particular situation, it is harder to get the metrics that you need, because as far as they're concerned, it's, I asked you to get this course, you've gone and got this course. Out of the people I've given this course to, X% have completed it. However, if you reframe that conversation, where it's speaking to the team lead or manager and going, what is the problem here? The problem is X. Okay, how do we know whether we are solving this problem? Here are the metrics. All right, fine. Let me go away, come up with what does the learning resources, what does the learning strategy here look like? And then give me these metrics right now so I can get the baseline, and let's check in to see how this metric is moving over time. When you have the conversation framed around solving the problem, you're more likely to get managers and leaders who are more open to sharing those relevant metrics to see whether you're solving the problem or not. So I think it's really a big part of this is reframing that conversation from being more strategic problem solvers, again, rather than being order takers.
Yeah, I guess it's the tricky one to, sorry, Matt, yeah, did you have any thoughts on that one?
No, I was just actually going to move that then to kind of Cordez's point around the on the job piece, right? Like I agree, like actually empowering the L&D teams is a much better way of framing that question, like using the data, being able to map that data afterwards. Being able to check in and see if that money was worthwhile spending, like speak to the individuals who took the course, like what did you learn off the back of it, map that performance over time as well. But yeah, around like the on the job training, right? Like fundamentally, people want to develop, and if you take it to very big picture, they want to develop their careers. They want to, many people want to find fulfilling work, which pays them well, where they can work with a company that they enjoy, the people they're working with, that they can keep learning. They feel that they're working with managers and peers who are helping them develop and grow as well, right? So fundamentally, if that's like a generally accepted need of humans in white collar jobs, in particular in companies, then how do we make sure that that happens? And actually, it's not those external programs as much as ensuring that the on-the-job training is done well. So again, I agree with Cordes that actually it's more of a systemic problem that can be solved with systematic focus. So systemically, the problem is that you're essentially moving super fast, just focused on product, just focused on selling. But actually, if you develop the individuals and you give them space to grow and be the best versions of themselves, that will create better sales, better products, better engineered pieces of work. Now, that's the theory, obviously, behind it, but like it needs clear structure internally. People need to think about like how they design the organization, like who's going to be responsible for this. Like, highly advise splitting out groups between managers and ICs, but giving ICs responsibility for helping upskill other members of the team, making sure that people are having discussions, not just around like, how was your performance in the last 3 months, but like long-term careers. Like, what are your aspirations? What are you good at? What do you love doing? And what does the company need? And how do you map all of those pieces together to actually then work out, right, this person's super strong in this area and they love it. They love what they're doing. The company needs it. I want to help elevate them in that area because frankly, it's just going to benefit everybody around us. And I can negate this weakness as opposed to like, yeah, cool. We're just going to, get some data from the team, which is like, our team is weak in this area and we want some training. But actually, you got 1 or 2 folks on there who are like, yeah, actually, I'll let them slide on being weak in that because we don't need it. They're so strong in other areas. Just let them focus and grow. But again, it's the time, like, and understanding your team. And I think it's one of my biggest frustrations with so many folks that are particularly in management roles and often actually in leadership, that they don't understand the motivations, the long-term aspirations and motivations of their teams and how that maps back to what they love doing and what the company needs. Because if you can get that stuff right, then it addresses the point that Corda says, like, then you can actually put in systematic and specific training that helps individuals whilst they're doing their jobs, as opposed to like, here's a training program and we're going to fix all of you with this one thing, because not everybody is the same, right? Sorry, rant over. I get really angry about that.
No, this is a good place to rant, Matt, so it's fine. One thing you mentioned there is development conversations. So essentially, if we're defining the problem better and then we're saying that the problem is something that's going to move the needle for the business, then it's natural that people are going to have that mindset of like, what's in it for me now, right? If I do this and it helps the business achieve X, like Nelson said, shorten the sales cycle, close more deals, they're more naturally going to have that that sort of mindset of what's in it for me. So how, I guess one thing that we spoke about before, Matt, was removing the idea of time from development conversations. And you alluded to it a bit there, but just saying like arbitrarily over the last 3 months, how is your performance versus the goal was to achieve this, yes or no? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you're taking like the kind of arbitrary 3 months, like people's development paths aren't linear, right? You don't just kind of leave university and then just keep going up like this. Schools and universities are really bad for that. You do a year, you complete exams, you go back, you do the next year, repeat ad infinitum until you finish education. Then you hit the world of work and then you realize, it's not like that here. And you go up a bit, down a bit, sideways a bit, up, down, up, a combination of all of those factors. So when you're measuring people on like, what are they doing in the last 3 months? It's like, where were they in that period of kind of broader growth? And is it what can you see as a manager as part of that? Oftentimes in small companies, You've got people who have only been in the company for 6 months to a year. So it's, you've got compressed timelines on this that you've got to take into account. But often it's the case that you're like, right, this is 3 months. This is what they did. This is what they didn't do. And it becomes very much like a tick box exercise and very problematic for longer term development conversations. So trying to like separate those out, having clarity around like what does a career progression framework or structure look like within the business, and how can we separate that from performance conversations which take that into account, maybe some form of company goal setting, individual team, however you want to structure it, and then see how that person's development is growing in the areas that they want to develop in and you want them to develop in over time. As opposed to, yeah, as you said, like the individual motivations piece. I was talking to someone on my team recently, and actually, like, quite frankly, I know this is verboten. They're not mission driven. They just actually at this stage of their life want to earn some more money. And I've got no problem with that. I'm like, cool. If that's what motivates you and that's what you want, and you want some clear set goals, and that means you get a pay rise, fine by me. Because quite frankly, I'm all on board with that. Like, enable the person to pull their motivations into the daily life, and don't, be shy about exploring those as a manager and a leader. So I think that when you to pull back to your original point around that kind of development piece and whether 3 months is right, it's not just the timelines. It's like, find out everything about the person, like know them really deeply, build a trusting relationship so that you can work together on that development, because everyone benefits off the back of it.
Yeah, definitely. Nelson, I know you'll have some thoughts on that, because we've bonded over our shared love of the 4 Ps from marketing that we've never used since finishing studying. Yeah, maybe you have some thoughts on that around the development conversations.
Yeah, I think from a learning and development perspective, I actually think it's quite risky to tie learning to career progression. And this often happens in organizations where we kind of set an expectation where if you complete training program ABC, then you're now ready for a promotion. And that's the kind of understanding people have. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where I've completed this, I've got X number of CPD points, so now I'm ready to move on to the next part of my career. Now, there's a couple of things wrong with that. The first thing is, again, it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's unlikely you are actually ready for that job just because you've completed that training program. But also, for example, if that individual doesn't get that promotion, we're back to a negative feedback loop again. Right, where they've now said, well, I thought if I complete this, I'd get a promotion. I've not got the promotion. So actually, the next time you say I've got to do this training program, I'm not going to do it because I don't think I'm going to get promoted. And so it creates a disconnect. You're not learning as an employee to get your promotion. That's not the direct connection. The direct connection is learning applied is better performance, and better performance gets you your promotion. Right. So that's the connection we need to build in, is you're learning because the problem we're trying to solve is a performance problem. It's a challenge that you have. And by solving that challenge, your performance improves. And when your performance improves, you get to progress in your career. And I think shifting that narrative is really, really important in terms of building that relationship between learning and performance rather than learning and promotion. So that's the only thing I'd say around how the messaging is internally. It's a risky place to be when you tie learning directly with career progression.
Yeah. Matt, any sort of thoughts to add to that?
I'm just going to go straight out and challenge Nelson on that one, but not because. So I think it can be better tied to progression, but only if progression is done well. And I think I would agree with you, when progression is just a framework and it's just a tick box exercise, and that just relates to promotions only, and that's all you're thinking about, then yes, it's a terrible idea. And I fully agree with you, and I've got your back on that one. When it's, however, done like in a better way, when it's based around an understanding, a starting point for a conversation between individuals and managers, when it has deliberately got some ambiguity within it, it's not like how much experience, or have you done this learning program, or have you ticked box X, or done, I don't know, X amount of hours on this thing, all of which would be completely pointless metrics. Instead, if it's a really good point around like, right, we've got a company-wide framework. We've got communication as one of the core competencies. I think that in terms of like how you've been doing with the team, in terms of running the weekly meeting, I've seen such a marked improvement in the approach that you've taken to running that, and it was so great that you were able to kind of use your own kind of nous and inputting that together, right? Like that's a useful thing. There's something specific, there's tangibility around it, there's development, and it's about like not mapping the progression piece to the levels, which is like, how do you get the promotion? But like, how can we create tangential opportunities for this person to find ways of getting better in their role? Be that on the job learning, be that mentoring with other people, be that just connecting them with other people in the company to talk to and spend time with, where they could benefit, right? Like maybe, it's a classic, get sales and marketing to actually have a conversation with each other now and then. Or maybe, product should go and speak to the CS team once or twice to actually find out like what's going on there. And by fostering that and thinking about like career development conversations in a long-term sense with learning opportunities as a kind of sidecar piece of that, then I think it can be done really well. But I agree with you. The problem is most people don't do it like that. It's all about the levels, all about the promotion, all about the dollar. That's it.
Yeah, it again goes back to the idea that learning and development is not, learning isn't the end goal, right? You completing that, it's the enabler here of performance. And the reason why I say the performance-driven learning is such a critical piece, because although we hire for skills, we fire for performance, right? And therefore, whether you completed that learning, whether you've got this accreditation, you've got these certificates, etc., isn't the thing that's essentially going to get you fired, right? What we fire for is when people are not performing. And so the conversation really needs to be about both the L&D, the rest of the business. Everyone can get aligned around performance, right? They might not be able to get themselves aligned around learning, but what they're all interested in is better performance. So I think reframing that conversation where, the career progression is the performance, and the performance is enabled by better learning and development. Rather than pulling out the performance piece, and it's a direct connect between L&D and career progression, I think is dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. We're sort of coming to the final third of the show now, so I'd love if anyone does have any sort of more questions around these topics, or if you're kind of facing an L&D problem that you'd like some maybe brainstorming on how to solve, then do feel free to drop those in the chat now. But I guess, Amrush, yeah, sure. Do you want to come on and sort of ask your question?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm attending from a place that's looks like my room, so I pardon for that. It's such nice platform for interacting with everyone. Yeah, it was about a week ago actually, meeting with a client, where a lot of things went wrong during the training, and it has like every training, like something or the other has gone wrong in the past few years, and that has really taught me a lot of things. And nowadays, whenever I go to a client meeting, or whenever I'm working somewhere in L&D's capacity, I try to make it as much as a team's objective rather than mine, because see, when I've gone and tried to design a training program, I've focused on a lot of research before defining a problem, so that I know the problem well and I can create the value. Yes, it worked in some instance. Yes, it did not. In the instances where it did not work, I guess the vendor that I was working with did not turn up well. So there was some problem or the other. And what I have learned, I'm still learning about this, but what I generally try to do is I try to involve as many stakeholders as possible. I don't involve everyone because that creates more problem. But what I generally do is, let's say accounting manager wants a training, right? So, okay, the accounting manager wanting a training, then I try to involve the accounting manager while defining the problem, number one. Number two, I involve him while selecting a vendor, because the vendor, see, if I communicate with the vendor, if I miscommunicate, then the people taking the training might not see that value. And there is one other thing that I ask both to the vendors and to the managers. When will this training create value for the company? And I always report this value to my manager, so that the company sees like the training is creating value within a certain deadline. Some training takes two weeks, some takes 3 months, some takes 6 months, right? So depending upon that, it's not just me giving the training, it's the managers also being able to see the value coming. So I might not be doing it perfectly, but this is just one example that I do. And thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to share.
Thanks, Samrush. I guess Nelson and Matt, part of that equation there is like detaching learning from a timescale. Like often you say that gets added arbitrarily, like it's going to be a 6-week course, but actually, like Amrish said there, it's like time to value, isn't it? And I guess as part of that, what Amrish said as well is when do you involve stakeholders so that they add value and see value? So do you have any thoughts on sort of how that can be done better?
Matt, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think in terms of take the time piece in particular, I think I agree that like the time boxing piece of it can be super frustrating, particularly when you've got, say, let's take a structured learning program, but let's take something like, if we pull back to like a manager development program again, right? Like, okay, your classic is, your 2-day sheep dip conference center, Leicester. You built the program, you've got an external facilitator, you run them through the sheep dip, done. Everyone had a nice cup of tea and a good chat, but no one really learned anything, right? But actually, really that development comes over time, and you're not going to see, as you say, the kind of outcomes, and you might need further inputs down the line. So actually stretching that out, elongating that process may actually be better and much more effective, giving people the chance to combine learning through classroom, structured homework, like applying the practical pieces of this, as opposed to just theoretical rubbish, taking a more practical approach to it, and then getting further coaching down the line. Like that would be a better way of structuring it, right? Because the time bounding is kind of a pointless metric. What you want to see is that people feel and can see that their managers are better at supporting them, are better at developing them, and they're giving you feedback on that. But that's not going to come, a week after a sheep dip course in Leicester. I've got no problem with Leicester. I'm just trying to pick someone in the middle of really blandly in the middle of the country. So yeah, in terms of the time boxing thing, I don't think that's like the best way of doing it. It also kind of covers the inputs piece as well, but I'll let Nelson follow up on that.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a time element for the problem, right? Because the problem is either now or it's a problem that you see coming. The problem itself has a time to it. And often I think the problem that L&D face is being able to react to that problem within the time where it's relevant. But if you're spending too much time trying to build the most beautiful and perfect training program, you might have the most beautiful training program, but you may have missed the boat on actually solving the problem and making it immediately relevant for your target audience, your internal customers. So there is definitely a time element. And I think not thinking about the time is the reason why we still have these big bang training programs, right? It is rather than really focusing on, okay, what are the things we can absolutely prioritize to start moving the needle in the direction of the desired impact, which might actually be a lot more self-directed elements, or it might be not a 2-day course, but a quick an hour synchronous session where it's not a lecturer saying things at you, but it's more of an interactive session for you to apply things that have already been shared and consumed asynchronously. Right, it's a better use of that time to be able to address that problem when it's relevant. And so I definitely think there's a time element which is not around the structuring of your training program, but actually the timing of the problem is the only time that we should really be thinking about.
I suppose part of it is always picking the right tool from your toolbox, right? Like just because you can create a nice set of 10 videos you don't have to. Like, one thing I always see is when people take a screenshot of notes on their phone and upload it to somewhere like LinkedIn, it gets a lot of traction because it's the quickest way to communicate value in the time needed to communicate the value, as opposed to, like you said, Nelson, you don't need the most polished thing in the world. It's like, what's the forces for courses? What's the best thing now to solve that problem now? And I guess it's a bit of a mindset shift for moving away from just because I can do something. I don't need to, moving that from the equation.
And that's the challenge, right? When you're building the capacity for, nothing against instructional designers or learning designers, but if as an organization you're building your capacity for instructional designers and learning designers, then you want to use that capacity, right? So every problem you see across the business, you're going to want an instructional designer to work on a course because you've already paid for that capacity there. So what it does is you are almost, as the saying goes, where, with a person with a hammer, everything is a nail. That's essentially what's happening here, where every problem across the business, you almost self-prescribe a course because you've already sunk the resources to build that capacity. And I think that shift there's nothing against. Of course, you need instructional designers to build courses or learning experiences that are effective at driving the desired impact. But that's not the answer for every problem. And going back to what you said, Gary, it is about finding the right tool from the toolkit for the problem.
Yeah, definitely. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I'd agree, right? As you said, like what is the problem that you're trying to solve for? There's a million different ways of bringing in learning to people's lives. So yeah, finding the right thing at the right time for the right people is of course going to be an important piece of that. So yeah, I would agree with Nelson there.
I'm glad you got that instructional design thing off your chest, Nelson, because next week, 2 weeks time, we're joined by two people with a background in instructional design. So get that out of the way now. Actually, I'll drop a link in the chat if anyone's interested in seeing what the next session is ahead of time as well. But yeah, again, if anyone else has any further questions, please do drop them in the chat. I guess something we've touched on a bit throughout all of this is maybe a changing role for L&D. Like, thank you, Kumi. That was a small plug. Yeah, like L&D maybe doesn't need to do everything itself. If it builds better relationships with people, if it defines a better problem, it can streamline the amount of involvement it needs to have, can involve itself at the right times rather than trying to be involved in every step of the cycle. Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think as Nelson pointed to earlier, right? It's like, how do we just become less transactional and actually engage with everyone across the business, as many people across the business to solve specific problems. So being able to prioritize, being able to advise, speak to leaders who are like, oh, I want to send 3 of my members of my team on this particular course for these engineers. I want to, get a couple of people on the design team to this conference, or I want to build this structure program, solve this, right? Like, or I want to do this on the job thing. Actually, you then free up the time if you're able to engage with them and find out why, and then speak to the team members themselves and find out why. Building better problem statements, being clearer around it allows you to be like, okay, can we map this back sensibly to what the company needs, but also how we can keep the individuals learning, and you can balance your time and advise far more effectively than you can if you're just like, cool, yes, we'll check providers, we'll check conference, here is budget, off you go, which is just completely ineffective. So I think, yeah, by actually working on the problems, work with individuals, you find better ways of solving for a broader set of folks, but on a more individualized basis, because you can advise as opposed to wasting your time being transactional.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to what we were talking about earlier around output versus outcome, right? And when you've got an organizational culture that is focused on output, that's when I feel like L&D and also the wider people team feel like they have to be doing everything, right? That they have to do things to demonstrate they're creating this output. But when you move towards a outcome-based culture where you just want to see the impact, you want to see you're driving meaningful results, then it's less about what are you doing in terms of what have you produced, what have you created as the people or the L&D team. And it's more about how were you a part of enabling the solution to this problem. And I think it actually helps create a more collaborative environment where there's bias towards action, and you want to get start doing things quickly to move towards the outcome. And as a result, you look for the quickest way to move in that direction. And the quickest way to do it is to leverage the other people in the business. We're talking about marketing for L&D. I'd love to know how often L&D is speaking with their own marketing teams, beyond top level branding for, let me stick our logo on our course. Beyond that, are you actually talking to them about, what are marketing strategies you can leverage for your internal customer, your employees, right? How many L&D teams are actually talking to business to understand what are our customers saying? Right? Because essentially the problems that your external customers are flagging are the problems that are affecting your internal customers. So how many people do that? How many people are actually hearing what's impacting the business? So I definitely think the shift towards outcome will build a more collaborative environment, which is key for L&D to really be able to deliver real impact.
And part of that could be having some structure around it as well, actually, because I remember speaking to someone like an expert in knowledge management who told me that they have like a scheduled monthly check-in with the departments that matter, because it's quite easy to say, actually, yeah, I spoke to sales recently, and then recently could be anywhere between 2 years ago and this week for most people, right? So I suppose it's about having a bit more structure around those conversations, just asking honestly, like, is what I'm doing still helping you solve the problem? Because like it's being a bit more ruthless in the conversations, I suppose, and being a bit more rejective, I guess. Cool. Actually, Amrush had another sort of question he wanted to share. So Amrush, are you happy to come on and ask that again?
Yes, I have one experience that I would like to share. When I first started in the capacity of L&D, I came from supply chain. So that was a little difficult transition. And then what I felt was everyone in the organization was looking up to you. And I was like, we had actually a small team of 2 people and working with 300 or 400 staff. That was overwhelming. And the journey was, I was very busy for the few months. Then I burned out. Then 1 month I could not work. So what I felt in that experience was L&D is not your first point of contact. Or I would like to say, leaders should also be a part of L&D. That's how I also learned about grooming. So when I started making managers also a part of L&D team, then that helped me also correct a lot of mistakes that I was doing while giving training before, like scoping the training, finding the value in the training, and even like I used to have like hundreds of emails in a day from different people from different departments. Now, after making sure the managers were the first point of contact, that did 2 things. My email list was not that long. Another, the culture changed of the organization. The culture changed that rather than reaching me, they reached their managers. So the relationship between them and the managers also improved. And now they were comfortable telling the managers that this is the training that I want. And that is how the scoping of the training also helped me later. But this value just came out after like a year of trial. So yeah, there was a lot of cultural issues also we have to work on in L&D. So just wanted to share that. Thanks, guys.
No worries. Yeah, actually quite a nice note to end on, really. Amrush has teed us up nicely there. But if we get better at solving the right problems, we can also help drive culture change, organizational change, like people see the value in collaborating, so they collaborate more, and that sort of influences the culture as a whole, doesn't it, I guess? Matt and Nelson, any sort of closing thoughts on that one before we wrap up?
Matt, over to you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's I would agree with Amrush, right? Like it is everybody's responsibility to get involved in the development of the organization, and fundamentally getting leadership buy-in to that, making them a key part of the process, and being clear to them of what that involves, like digging to understand problems, working out how that fits in the kind of tangled web of what you need, and then being able to like communicate and give the context clearly to people. Like that's absolutely critical. So yeah, fully agree with Amrush's point there.
Yeah, I think that leads us nicely to time then, really. So Matt, really appreciate you joining us today, and a big thank you to everyone who's logged in and shared their thoughts in the chat as well. If you want to know any more about Matt and the People Collective, connect with Matt on LinkedIn or go to peoplecollective.io. And like I said, we'll be back in a couple of weeks looking at how L&D teams can do more with less, and how they can provide value in an economic downturn. So sort of focusing on that topical issue of where we are now. So yeah, thanks a lot everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.